Welcome to RackForms Explainer for form persistence, or what we now call save and resume later. I do want to kind of drive that point home that save and resume later is the new name for this feature, but if you're a long-term RackForms / form boss user, you may have been used to calling this form persistence. So I do want to point that out. It's a new name for the exact same feature. So how do we actually use this? Well, there are three main modes of form persistence / save and resume later that we can use. And by the way, I'll refer to it as save and resume later for the rest of this video. There's three main modes. If you're not sure which one to use, if you've kind of stumbled across this video and you want to have the ability to save a user's position in a form and have them return to it at a later time, always use fully automated. This is by far the easiest and potentially safest way to use, and it's certainly also the most full-featured. So if you're not sure, fully automated. However, there are times where these other two may be appropriate. And so that's what we want to take a look at here, is mainly these two guys, but then we'll end on fully automated. So how do we actually use save and resume later? Well, it's very simple. We simply select each page in our job and we say what type of save and resume behavior that we want. So in this case, we'll start off talking with IP-based. So I'm going to select my first page, select IP-based, select my second page, select IP-based, and select my third page and select IPA-based. Now, you may be saying to yourself, why do I have to keep selecting it for each page? Well, at the end of the day, we don't know if you do want save and resume for every single page in your job. Maybe these two pages are really, let's say, common. So it's like basic information that's gonna be kind of boring, you don't want to fill out. And this page saves credit card information. Well, under no circumstances should you ever do that using save and resume. This should always be based on a login system. And so we don't want to make it a global setting. Just say, remember every single form in this field. That would be very, very bad. We want to give you the ability to control that. So that's why we have this as a per page attribute. Okay. Now that I've set up each page, in this case, by the way, I should mention that we do want every page to be remembered, but now that we have this, by selecting IP-based here, that means that I can go ahead, I can start filling out my form, and as soon as I submit one of these pages, so let's say I submit one and go to page 2, I can now take this address right here, go into a completely different browser, so let's search Chrome here. I can go to the first page of the form, and you'll see now that even across browsers, my session has been saved. Now, as the name suggests, and this is the key here, this is based on IP address. So if I moved machines, or even if I went to a virtual machine that maybe had a different IP address than this one, this would not work. Therefore, this method of IP-based is very simplistic, it's not very secure, and it's only going to be appropriate for very specific solutions. Maybe you're the only person who's ever going to hit this form and you just want a really quick way to remember answers. This would be appropriate. Maybe you have a company intranet system where you absolutely know that a user is going to access their computer from the same place every time and have the same IP address. This would be appropriate. But for everything else, it's generally not appropriate. Now, for those more advanced situations, or I should say for very advanced situations, we want to use session-based. Now, session-based is actually probably a little bit too much to get into here. If you do have a specific situation where you need to use session-based, please just contact us, info@rackforms.com. We'd be happy to kind of step you through your specific job. But just as a very quick primer, what session-based basically is if I actually click this link right here to go to the documentation page, session-based means that we are at some point going to have a session variable that is a raw PHP session variable that has the name of FB entry ID. And as long as we provide that, as long as we have a session variable accessible to us at some point with that name, that is what RackForms will use as the form persistence mechanism. In other words, if I had my form page here, and I'm actually literally going to copy this code right here to my PHP block. So let me just kind of paste that in. If I have this on every one of my pages in my job in the PHP head code block, this will essentially mean that when RackForms behind the scenes saves this information for this page, it's not actually going to use the IP of the machine. It's going to use that identifier that FB entry ID has. In other words, in this particular case, it's 10. And I'm actually going to show you, just so you're absolutely clear, we're not going to go too deep, but just so you're absolutely clear, I can show you what that looks like in the database. But I'm just going to select session-based for all these, and I'm basically going to go through the form here again, submit the first page. In my database, I'm going to refresh this table of saved entries that I have here. This guy right here is the key. So FB entry ID is tied to this specific session element. So I basically have a page here. This is a table called FB entries temp. This is how the whole system works. It has this FB entry ID. In this case, it equals 10. And the reason why it equals 10 is because in my PHP code, I said you have an entry ID of 10. And so therefore, so long as you create this guy uniquely, and by the way, this would usually come from a login system of some sort. So this would be a value that you get after you log in. And by the way, this could come from things like Active Directory, or this could come from a custom login system. But however it comes, as long as you have a valid value in FB entry ID, and as long as that value is unique, then this session system is incredibly secure. Because now, as long as I have that session variable set up, and again, this would come from a login system like Active Directory or a PHP login form, for example, this guy right here, so login form MySQL or MS SQL, as long as we actually have this, then your users will be able to log in and they will have all their form entries remembered. Again, this is more advanced. I just want to give you the quick update here to say that that's what that does. But we're going to move past it now, and we're going to talk about the last one, which is fully automated. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, fully automated is by far the easiest to use, and it's also by far the most feature complete and safe. So unlike IP-based, where let's say somebody came onto your computer and now they could just bring up all your records, fully automated is based on the concept that RackForms is actually going to create a bit of UI in your form right here called save and return later. And what this is going to do is when I submit my form through, and let's say I reach page 2 and I'm filling out this form, I want to stop. If I hit save and return later, it's going to give me an address which I can then copy and paste into a completely different browser on a completely different machine across the rest of the world, and it's instantly going to retrieve those form records that I had. So it's all based on this ID right here, which is then tied to our form submission. We can actually see this if we look at the database once more, that once again we're using FB entry ID, but now we're actually filling out that value for ourselves. You can almost think of this as an automated and much simpler way of using the session-based persistence, but now we're handling this complex logic of making sure that we have unique entry for each one of these records and a unique identifier automatically. And again, it has some other features here. So for example, it will create this nice email link so I could fill in my email, and as long as your server has an email server set up, you can hit submit right here, and this will actually send that to our valid email address. So very, very simple to use this. Finally, I should say a caveat or two here. Save persistence, save and resume later, does not unfortunately work with file uploads. So if you have a system where you need users to upload files, this will not work with it. So if you had, for example, a file upload slot on page 1 here, and you wanted to save that file upload, it's not going to save that. And the reason for that is very simple. This could be potentially disastrous to a server if you ran out of room. In other words, do not ever use form persistence with things like file uploads. Save that for your last page, and then do this. Make sure you actually disable form persistence so that this last page is where we filled all our information. Let's say we're creating a baseball team. We filled out the team name, all the players, the venue, all this other stuff has been filled out. And then finally, at the end of that, you're going to have a file upload where maybe you put your team logo or something like that. And this is only going to happen at the very end of that process. And again, the reason why we do that is if we tried to save all sorts of file uploads with a form persistence system, it would be very easy for an attacker to craft a script that goes onto your form and uploads hundreds of thousands of gigabytes worth of junk on your server and then shuts your server down. So it's just for your own sake and for my sake as a developer to not allow that to happen. So that is the one limitation that we usually want to be aware of. But other than that, our save and resume logic is usually really, really simple and easy to set up. So I shall leave it at that. Anything else that comes to your mind in terms of questions about this process, particularly with the session-based form persistence, please let me know. Always happy to help at info@rackforms.com. And thanks for watching.